The fluorescent lights of Whitmore Holdings' executive boardroom hummed against the tension already thick in the air. Victoria Whitmore stood at the head of the table, her tailored charcoal suit a perfect match for the steel in her eyes. Somewhere beneath the polished mahogany, a man in maintenance coveralls knelt quietly, wiping up a coffee spill that one of the junior executives had caused in his haste to grab documents. Victoria's gaze swept past the board members and landed on him. Without warning, she spoke. "You're fired." The room went silent. The maintenance worker paused, his cloth still pressed against the floor. He looked up, not with anger, not with shock. Then he simply removed his gloves, set them on his cart, and said, "If that's what you decide, I'll still finish the floor first." The calm in his voice made Victoria's breath catch. The boardroom held its stillness, and for the first time in years, she didn't know what to say. The man's name was Daniel Crawford, and he had worked the night shift at Whitmore Holdings for nearly 3 years. He was 41 years old with hands roughened by years of labor and a face that carried the quiet fatigue of someone who had learned to carry weight without complaint. He returned to wiping the floor as though nothing had happened, his movements unhurried, methodical. Victoria watched from the corner of her eye, pretending to review the quarterly projections on her tablet. She had fired people before, dozens of them, sometimes with cause, sometimes as a strategic message to the rest of the company, but she had never seen a reaction quite like this. The board members exchanged glances. Gregory Holt, the chief financial officer, leaned toward Victoria and whispered, "What was that about?" She didn't answer. Across the room, Marcus Chen, the youngest member of the board, looked at Daniel with something between confusion and admiration. The silence stretched until Daniel finished the last of the spill, wrung out his cloth, and placed it back on his cart. He stood slowly, his knees cracking from the effort, and pushed the cart toward the door without a word. Victoria's experiment had been simple in theory. She believed that true character revealed itself under pressure, and she had been testing her employees for years, watching how they responded to sudden criticism, unexpected setbacks, impossible deadlines. Most crumbled. Some fought back, a few resigned on the spot, but no one had ever simply continued working. No one had ever looked at her with that quiet, unbothered dignity and said they would finish the job anyway. She excused herself from the meeting under the pretense of taking a call, stepping into the hallway just in time to see Daniel disappear around the corner. She followed at a distance, her heels clicking against the marble floors. He stopped near the service elevator and pulled out his phone, not to call anyone, but to check something. She couldn't see the screen, but she noticed the way his shoulders relaxed slightly, the way his thumb hovered over the display as though he were reassuring himself of something. Then he typed a short message and slipped the phone back into his pocket. What Victoria didn't know was that Daniel had just sent a text to his 6-year-old daughter, Emily. It read simply, "Daddy's okay. Be good in class." He had learned long ago that children could sense when something was wrong, even from miles away. Emily had her mother's intuition, the same quiet awareness that had made Sarah Crawford the kind of woman who noticed everything. Sarah had been gone for 4 years now, taken by a car accident on a rainy November evening, and Daniel had spent every day since then trying to be both parents at once. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the basement level where his locker waited. The doors closed, and for a moment he allowed himself to exhale. He had been fired before, twice in fact, both times from jobs where his refusal to cut corners had made him unpopular with supervisors who valued speed over quality. He had learned that arguing never saved a job. Keeping calm, finishing the work, and walking away with his integrity intact, those were the things that mattered. Emily needed a father who came home steady, not one who came home angry. Back in the boardroom, Victoria Whitmore sat through the rest of the meeting without hearing a word. Her mind kept returning to Daniel's face, to the absence of resentment in his eyes. She had expected him to protest, to demand an explanation, perhaps even to threaten legal action. Instead, he had simply accepted her decision and continued working. It unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. Gregory Holt droned on about profit margins and market expansion, but Victoria was elsewhere, turning over a single question in her mind. What kind of man doesn't fight back? When the meeting finally ended, she remained seated while the others filed out. Marcus Chen lingered at the door, looking as though he wanted to say something, but Victoria's expression discouraged conversation. She waited until the room was empty, then pulled up the company's personnel database on her tablet. Daniel Crawford, maintenance staff, night shift. Emergency contact, Emily Crawford, daughter. No spouse listed. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then closed the file without knowing why she had opened it in the first place. The boardroom meeting had resumed for only a short time when the door opened and Daniel Crawford stepped back inside. Victoria looked up sharply, surprised to see him. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be gone collecting his things, leaving the building like all the others before him. But there he stood, his cart parked just outside the door, his expression unchanged from before. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I left my phone charger by the window. I'll just be a moment." He crossed the room without hurrying, retrieved a small white cable from behind a potted plant, and tucked it into his pocket. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed audibly. He glanced at the screen, and something in his face shifted, a flicker of concern that he quickly suppressed. Victoria watched as he excused himself again and stepped into the hallway to take the call. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see him through the glass partition. His posture had changed. The calm was still there, but beneath it was something urgent, something that made his free hand clench and unclench at his side. When he ended the call, he stood motionless for a moment, staring at the floor. Then he walked back to the boardroom door and knocked softly. Victoria nodded for him to enter. Daniel stepped inside, his voice steady but quieter than before. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. "That was my daughter's school. She's not feeling well, and they've asked me to pick her up early." He paused as though weighing his next words carefully. "I know I've been let go, but I wanted to ask permission to leave the building through the front entrance. The service exit is on the other side, and I don't want to waste time." The request was so simple, so reasonable, that Victoria found herself nodding before she could think of a reason to refuse. Daniel thanked her and turned to go. As he pushed his cart toward the door, something fell from his back pocket, a small photograph, its edges worn from years of handling. Marcus Chen noticed first and picked it up, intending to return it, but he glanced at the image and his expression softened. It was a family photo, slightly faded. A younger Daniel stood beside a woman with kind eyes and auburn hair, both of them smiling at a toddler in a yellow dress. The woman had her arm around Daniel's waist, and the child was mid-laugh, her tiny hands reaching toward the camera. Marcus handed the photo to Victoria without a word. She looked at it for a long moment, then called out, "Mr. Crawford." Daniel stopped at the door. "You dropped this." She held up the photograph, and something in her chest tightened when she saw the way his eyes flickered with grief before he crossed the room to retrieve it. "Thank you," he said it quietly. He slipped the photo back into his pocket, nodded once, and left. Victoria stared at the closed door long after he was gone. The woman in the photograph was clearly no longer alive. She could tell by the way Daniel had looked at it, by the careful way he had handled it, as though it were the most precious thing he owned. Her test, her little experiment in character, suddenly felt smaller than it had that morning. She had fired a widower, a single father, a man whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he had responded with more grace than she had ever shown anyone. Gregory Holt was saying something about the Henderson acquisition, but Victoria wasn't listening. She was already standing, already gathering her things. "We'll reconvene tomorrow," she said abruptly. "Something's come up." She didn't wait for their questions. She walked out of the boardroom and headed for the elevator, her heels echoing in the empty hallway. The parking garage was quiet in the middle of the afternoon. Victoria stepped out of the elevator and scanned the rows of vehicles until she spotted Daniel's figure near the far end, loading his cart into the back of an older model pickup truck. She hesitated. This wasn't something she did. Victoria Whitmore didn't follow employees to parking garages. She didn't second-guess her decisions. But something about this man, about the quiet dignity in his voice when he said he would finish the floor anyway, made her want to understand. She kept her distance, watching from behind a concrete pillar as Daniel secured his equipment and climbed into the driver's seat. The truck's engine coughed twice before catching, and she noticed the rust along the wheel wells, the dent in the rear bumper that suggested years of hard use. This was not a man who had anything to spare. She followed him in her own car, a sleek black sedan that felt suddenly excessive. As she pulled out of the garage and into the afternoon traffic, she told herself she was being ridiculous. She told herself to turn around, to go back to her office and forget about this entire morning. But she kept driving. The elementary school was a modest brick building on the outskirts of the city, its playground empty in the midday heat. Victoria parked across the street and watched as Daniel hurried toward the entrance, his long strides betraying the urgency he had hidden so well in the boardroom. A few minutes later, he emerged with a small girl in his arms. She had dark hair like her father's and a face that was pale with exhaustion. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, and even from a distance, Victoria could see the way she pressed her cheek against his shoulder, seeking comfort. Daniel carried her to the truck and settled her gently in the passenger seat, buckling her seatbelt with careful hands. He said something to her, something Victoria couldn't hear, but she saw the girl nod weakly. Then Daniel leaned in and pressed a kiss to her forehead, his hand lingering on her hair for a moment, before he closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. Victoria sat motionless in her car, watching them pull away. She thought about her own father, about the way he had never once picked her up from school, never once kissed her forehead when she was sick. William Whitmore had believed that affection made children weak, that discipline and high expectations were the only gifts a parent could give. Victoria had grown up in penthouses and private schools, surrounded by every luxury except warmth. She started her car and pulled away from the curb, but she didn't go back to the office. Instead, she drove aimlessly through the city, past the gleaming towers of downtown, past the quiet neighborhoods where families lived ordinary lives. She thought about Daniel's face when he saw the photograph, about the grief that flickered in his eyes before he tucked it away. She thought about the little girl in his arms, about the way she had clung to him as though he were the only solid thing in her world. By the time Victoria reached her apartment that evening, she had made a decision. She didn't know what it meant yet, didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew that something had changed in her that morning, some small crack in the armor she had worn for so long, and she knew that she needed to see Daniel Crawford again. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the office earlier than usual. She had spent the night reviewing Daniel's personnel file, learning everything she could about the man she had fired on a whim. 41 years old, born in Akron, Ohio. No college degree, but a spotless work record stretching back 2 decades. He had started as a janitor at a hospital in Cleveland, worked his way up to facility supervisor, then lost the position when the hospital was acquired and his entire department was eliminated. He had moved to the city 3 years ago, taking the night shift at Whitmore Holdings because it allowed him to be home when Emily woke up for school. She also learned that his wife Sarah had died in a car accident 4 years earlier. The file didn't say more than that, but Victoria had searched the news archives and found a brief article about the crash. A drunk driver had run a red light and struck Sarah's car on the driver's side. She had died at the scene. Emily, who had been in the back seat, had survived with minor injuries. Daniel had been at work when it happened. Victoria closed the file and stared out the window at the city below. She thought about what it would be like to receive that phone call, to hear that the person you loved most in the world was gone, and there was nothing you could do about it. She thought about what it would take to keep going after that, to wake up every morning and care for a child who had lost her mother, to work nights and sacrifice sleep just to be present for her days. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for human resources. "I need you to pull up the termination paperwork for Daniel Crawford," she said, "and then I need you to cancel it." That afternoon, Victoria found herself driving back to the school where she had watched Daniel pick up his daughter. She didn't know what she was hoping to find, didn't know what she would say if she saw him, but she parked across the street anyway and waited, watching the parents arrive one by one to collect their children. Daniel's truck pulled up precisely on time. He climbed out and walked toward the school entrance, his pace unhurried but purposeful. A few minutes later, he emerged with Emily beside him, her small hand clasped in his. She looked better today, her cheeks less pale, her steps more lively. She was talking animatedly about something, gesturing with her free hand, and Daniel was listening with the kind of attention that made Victoria's chest ache. She got out of her car before she could talk herself out of it. She crossed the street and approached them, her heels clicking against the asphalt. Daniel noticed her first. His expression flickered with surprise, then settled into cautious neutrality. Emily looked up at her with curious eyes. "Mr. Crawford," Victoria said, "I was hoping we could talk." Daniel studied her for a moment, then glanced down at his daughter. Emily, why don't you go sit in the truck for a minute? I'll be right there. The girl hesitated, looking between her father and the stranger, then nodded and ran to the truck. Daniel turned back to Victoria, his expression unreadable. Is there something else you need from me, Miss Whitmore? Victoria took a breath. I wanted to apologize. What I did yesterday was wrong. I had no right to treat you that way. The words felt foreign in her mouth. She couldn't remember the last time she had apologized to anyone, let alone an employee. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He looked at her, really looked at her, as though he were trying to see past the designer clothes and the polished exterior to whatever was underneath. Why did you do it? He asked finally. Why did you fire me like that in front of everyone? She owed him an honest answer. I thought it was a test. I wanted to see how you would react under pressure. I've done it before with other employees. Most of them fail, and when they fail, I confirm that they don't belong at my company, that they don't have what it takes. Daniel nodded slowly as though this confirmed something he had already suspected. And what did I do? Did I pass your test? Victoria thought about the way he had removed his gloves, the way he had said he would finish the floor anyway. She thought about the photograph and the grief in his eyes. You did something I've never seen before, she admitted. You didn't react at all. You just kept going. A ghost of a smile crossed Daniel's face. That's not because I don't feel things, Miss Whitmore. It's because I have a daughter who needs me to stay steady. Getting angry at you wouldn't have helped either of us. It wouldn't have paid my rent or put food on Emily's table. How do you do it? The question came out before Victoria could stop it. How do you stay so calm when everything is falling apart? Daniel was quiet for a moment. My wife used to say that anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. I didn't understand that when she was alive. I was young and hot-headed, always ready to fight. But after she died, I learned that the only person my anger hurt was me and Emily. So I stopped letting myself get angry at things I couldn't control. Victoria felt something shift inside her, some wall she had built long ago beginning to crumble. I canceled your termination, she said. If you want your job back, it's yours. Daniel considered this. I appreciate that, but I need to think about it. He glanced at his truck where Emily was watching them through the window. I should get her home. She's still recovering from yesterday. Victoria nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, handing it to him. My direct line. Call me when you've decided. Daniel took the card and studied it for a moment, then slipped it into his pocket. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. He turned and walked to his truck, climbing in beside his daughter. Victoria watched them drive away, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. 3 days passed before Daniel called. Victoria was in her office when her assistant buzzed through, announcing an unexpected visitor in the lobby. She told her to send him up, then spent the next few minutes straightening papers that didn't need straightening and adjusting her chair to a position that felt sufficiently professional. When Daniel entered her office, he looked different. He was wearing clean khakis and a blue button-down shirt, his hair neatly combed, his posture less guarded than before. He carried himself like a man who had made a decision and was at peace with it. Mr. Crawford, Victoria said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Please sit down. He sat, his hands resting calmly on his knees. I've thought about your offer, he said, and I've decided to decline. Victoria felt a flicker of surprise, though she tried not to show it. May I ask why? Daniel met her eyes steadily. Because I don't want a job that was given to me out of guilt. You felt bad about what happened, and that's understandable. But pity isn't a good foundation for employment. If I come back, it should be because I've earned it, not because you're trying to make yourself feel better. The directness of his words stung, but Victoria recognized the truth in them. She had offered him the job because she felt guilty, because his dignity had shamed her into reconsidering her actions. That wasn't respect. It was compensation. What if I offered you something different, she heard herself say. Not the maintenance job, something that actually uses your skills. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What skills would those be? Leadership, composure under pressure, the ability to stay calm when everyone else is falling apart. She leaned forward. I've been watching my employees for years looking for those qualities. Most of them can't handle real pressure. They crack, they lash out, they make excuses. But you didn't do any of those things. You just kept working. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? I want you to help me fix the culture at this company. We have a retention problem. Good people leave because the environment is toxic, because management treats them like disposable parts. I've been part of that problem, but I want to change it, and I think you might be able to help. Daniel studied her face, searching for something. Why me? You have hundreds of employees, HR departments, consultants. Why would you ask a janitor to help you fix your company? Because you're the only person I've ever met who responded to cruelty with grace. That's not something you can learn in business school. Before Daniel could respond, a sharp alarm pierced the air. Red emergency lights began flashing in the hallway outside Victoria's office. Her assistant's voice came over the intercom, strained with urgency. Miss Whitmore, we have a situation in the basement. Electrical fire. The building is being evacuated. Victoria stood abruptly, her heart racing. She grabbed her phone and moved toward the door, but Daniel was already ahead of her. Where's your main electrical panel? He asked, his voice sharp and focused. Basement level 2, but we need to evacuate. The fire department is on their way. Daniel shook his head. If it's an electrocuting fire near the main panel, you've got maybe 5 minutes before it spreads to the backup generators. If those go, you lose power to the whole building, including the elevator systems. Anyone trapped above the 10th floor won't be able to get out. Victoria stared at him. How do you know that? Because I've worked maintenance here for 3 years. I know every wire and pipe in this building. He was already moving toward the stairwell. Stay here. Get everyone out. I'll handle this. Wait. Victoria caught his arm. You can't go down there. It's too dangerous. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time she saw something fierce in his eyes. My daughter needs me to come home tonight. That means I need to make sure this building doesn't burn down with me in it. He pulled free of her grip and disappeared through the stairwell door. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Victoria's life. She coordinated the evacuation from the lobby, watching employees stream out of the building while fire trucks screamed to a halt outside. She kept checking her phone, hoping for word from Daniel, but there was nothing. The fire chief told her they were sending a team into the basement, but the smoke was too thick to see anything. Then, just as she was beginning to fear the worst, the emergency lights flickered and went steady. The alarm fell silent. A cheer went up from the firefighters near the basement entrance. And a moment later, Daniel emerged from the stairwell, his face streaked with soot, his shirt torn, but very much alive. He walked toward Victoria, coughing slightly from the smoke. Found the source, he said, his voice hoarse. Faulty wiring in the junction box near the backup generator. I managed to isolate it before it spread. Your building's going to need some repairs, but it's not going to burn down today. Victoria stared at him, words failing her. Around them, employees were gathering, murmuring among themselves as they realized what had happened. The fire chief approached, shaking Daniel's hand vigorously. That was damn brave what you did. You probably saved this whole building. Daniel shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the attention. Just did what needed to be done. Victoria finally found her voice. You came back. You were walking out of my office and you came back. Daniel met her eyes. I told you my daughter needs me to come home. That meant making sure everyone else could go home too. He paused, something softening in his expression. Besides, I'm not the kind of man who walks away when people need help, even from people who fired me. The boardroom was full when Victoria called the emergency meeting the next morning. Gregory Holt, Marcus Chen, and the other board members sat around the table, their faces grave. Word had spread about the fire and about the maintenance worker who had prevented a disaster. Victoria stood at the head of the table, her hands steady despite the turmoil in her chest. I need to address something before we discuss the building repairs, she said. 3 days ago, I fired a man named Daniel Crawford. I did it publicly without cause, as a test of his character. It was wrong and it was a violation of everything this company should stand for. The board members exchanged glances. Gregory Holt leaned forward. Victoria, this isn't the time for self-flagellation. We have a crisis to manage. This is exactly the time, Victoria replied, because the man I fired is the same man who saved this building yesterday. He had every reason to walk away. I humiliated him in front of all of you. But when he saw that people were in danger, he went into a burning building to help. That's the kind of person we've been driving away from this company. That's the culture I've helped create. Marcus Chen spoke up. What are you suggesting? Victoria took a breath. I'm suggesting that we need to change. Not just policies, but the way we treat people, the way we test them, judge them, discard them when they don't perform exactly how we want. She looked around the table. I've been running this company like my father did, like it's a war, but it's not. It's a community, and I've been treating people like enemies instead of allies. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Gregory Holt cleared his throat. The board has been discussing some concerns about your leadership style. What happened with Mr. Crawford has raised questions about judgment, about liability. Victoria nodded slowly. I understand. If the board wants to vote on my position, I won't fight it. It was Daniel who spoke next, stepping forward from where he had been standing near the door. Victoria hadn't noticed him enter, but there he was, still wearing the same blue shirt from yesterday, now cleaned and pressed. Before you do that, he said, I'd like to say something. The board members turned to look at him with surprise. Gregory Holt frowned. This is a private meeting. I invited him, Victoria said quietly. He has a right to be here. Daniel walked to the table, his presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with size or volume. Miss Whitmore made a mistake when she fired me. She knows that. But what she did after that mistake matters more. She apologized. She offered to make it right. And when the building was on fire, she didn't think about herself. She thought about her employees, about getting everyone out safely. He looked at each board member in turn. I've worked for a lot of companies. Most of them talk about values, about culture, about treating people with respect. But when things get hard, those words mean nothing. What matters is what people do when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain. He turned to Victoria. What I saw from Miss Whitmore these past few days tells me she's trying to be better. That's more than I've seen from most people in her position. The room was silent. Marcus Chen was the first to speak. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. That's helpful context. He looked at Victoria. I move that we table any discussion of leadership changes until we've had time to assess the situation more fully. The motion passed with minimal discussion. As the board members filed out, Daniel lingered behind. Victoria approached him, her voice low. You didn't have to do that. Daniel shrugged. I know, but it was the truth. You made a mistake, and then you tried to fix it. That's all any of us can do. Victoria studied his face. This man who had shown her more grace in 3 days than she had shown anyone in years. I meant what I said about the job offer, helping me change the culture here. I could use someone like you. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I'll think about it, but I need you to understand something first. I'm not interested in being a symbol or a mascot. If I do this, it's because I believe the work matters, not because of what happened between us. I understand. He nodded, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. There's one more thing. My daughter has been asking about you. She saw us talking at her school, and she wants to know who the fancy lady was. A smile tugged at his lips. She's decided you must be someone important because you were wearing heels. Victoria felt something warm bloom in her chest. Maybe I could meet her properly sometime, if that would be all right. Daniel considered this. I think she'd like that. He opened the door. I'll be in touch, Miss Whitmore. Victoria, she said. Please call me Victoria. The rooftop garden of Whitmore Holdings was quiet in the early evening light. Victoria had discovered it years ago but rarely visited, too consumed with board meetings and quarterly reports to notice the small patch of green that her landscaping team maintained above the clouds. Tonight, though, she stood at the railing and watched the sun dip below the skyline, feeling lighter than she had in months. The door behind her opened, and she turned to see Daniel stepping out onto the rooftop. Emily's hand clasped firmly in his. The little girl's eyes went wide when she saw the garden, the flowers, the view stretching out in every direction. Daddy, look, she exclaimed, pulling free to run toward a bed of yellow tulips. It's like a secret garden. Daniel watched her with a smile, then walked to stand beside Victoria at the railing. She's been talking about this all week, ever since I told her where I was going to be working. Victoria looked at him. So you've decided you'll take the job? Daniel nodded slowly. I've been thinking about what you said about changing the culture. It's not going to be easy. People don't change overnight, especially people who've been doing things a certain way for a long time. I know, but I have to try. This company is my father's legacy, but it doesn't have to be a monument to his worst instincts. She paused. I'd like it to be something better, something that actually helps people. Emily came running back, a tulip clutched in her hand. Look what I found. Can I keep it? Daniel crouched down to her level. You need to ask Miss Whitmore. It's her garden. Emily turned to Victoria with hopeful eyes. Please, it's so pretty. Victoria felt her heart squeeze. Of course you can keep it. And please call me Victoria. The little girl beamed and ran off to explore another corner of the garden. Daniel straightened, watching her go. She reminds me of her mother sometimes. That same curiosity, that same fearlessness. Victoria followed his gaze into the child, now crouched beside a small fountain, trailing her fingers through the water. You've done an incredible job with her, raising her on your own. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I don't feel incredible most days. Most days I just feel like I'm barely keeping up. He looked at Victoria. But she's worth it. Every hard day, every sleepless night, she's worth all of it. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Emily dart from flower to flower, her laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Finally, Victoria spoke. That day in the boardroom when I fired you, I thought I was testing you, but I realize now that I was the one being tested. She turned to face him, and I failed badly. Daniel shook his head. You didn't fail. You just hadn't found the right answer yet. What changed your mind about taking the job? He considered the question. You did, not the apology, not the job offer. It was the way you looked at Emily that day at her school, like you were seeing something you'd forgotten existed. I figure anyone who can still be surprised by kindness is worth taking a chance on. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back. I don't know if I deserve that kind of faith. Maybe not yet, but you're trying. That counts for something. He smiled, that quiet, steady smile that had unsettled her so much in the beginning. Besides, Emily's already decided she likes you, and she's a pretty good judge of character. As if on cue, Emily came running back, her hands now full of small stones she'd collected from around the fountain. Daddy, can we come back here again? Please. Daniel looked at Victoria, one eyebrow raised. That's up to our host. Victoria crouched down to Emily's level, the way she'd seen Daniel do. You can come back anytime you want. This garden was lonely before you got here. I think it needed a little girl to bring it back to life. Emily's face split into a wide grin. She threw her arms around Victoria's neck in a spontaneous hug that caught her completely off guard. Victoria froze for a moment, then slowly, carefully wrapped her arms around the child and held on. When Emily finally pulled back, Victoria straightened and found Daniel watching her with something unreadable in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly, for giving us a chance. Victoria looked at this man, this father, this unexpected teacher who had walked into her boardroom and changed everything. Thank you for staying, she said, even when I gave you every reason to leave. The sun had nearly set now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emily was tugging at her father's hand, eager to explore more of the garden before the light was gone. Daniel let himself be pulled along, but he glanced back at Victoria one last time. I didn't fire you that day, she called after him. Not really. I think I was firing myself, the person I'd become. She took a breath. It wasn't you I was testing, it was myself. Daniel held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly as though he had known this all along. Then Emily tugged his hand again, and he turned to follow her into the fading light, leaving Victoria standing at the railing with the sunset blazing before her and something that felt remarkably like hope taking root in her chest. In the sterile glow of a corporate boardroom, powerful CEO Victoria Whitmore fired maintenance worker Daniel Crawford on a cruel whim to test his character under pressure. Yet Daniel, a widowed single father quietly raising his young daughter Emily, responded not with anger or protest, but with unwavering grace. He simply said he'd finish cleaning the spill first. That calm dignity, born from years of loss and selfless love, shattered Victoria's worldview, forcing her to confront how her ruthless tests had poisoned the company culture she inherited. When a fire later threatened the building, Daniel risked his life to save it, proving that true strength lies not in breaking others, but in rising with integrity even when the world knocks you down. This deeply touching story delivers a powerful life lesson. Real character isn't revealed in moments of triumph, but in how we respond to unfairness, loss, and cruelty, with quiet grace, steady responsibility, and unbreakable love for those who depend on us. Daniel's refusal to let bitterness define him reminds us that protecting our peace and our children's hearts is the ultimate victory. Victoria's awakening shows that no one is beyond growth. Admitting mistakes and choosing empathy over ego can heal wounds we didn't even know we inflicted. In a world quick to judge and discard, this tale whispers that kindness under fire and second chances aren't weaknesses. They're the foundations of true leadership and humanity. What moved you most? The father's unshakable calm, the CEO's redemption, or the quiet power of grace? Have you ever faced unfair treatment and chosen dignity instead of anger? Share your stories in the comments below. They inspire us all. If this restored your faith in human goodness and the beauty of second chances, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's keep sharing these heartwarming tales that prove compassion and integrity always light the way forward. Thank you for being part of this journey.